With corona surging in the U.S., President Trump claims 99% of all cases are totally harmless. This despite record infection rates and more COVID deaths than in any other country in the world. America's struggle with the virus threatens to spiral out of control. The president used his Independence Day speech to heap praise on his own crisis management. But it seems that many Americans don't quite see it that way. With the economy in free fall and society deeply polarized, a record 69% say the country is on the wrong track. Trump's approval rate has plunged with elections just 4 months away. Corona in the USA, Trump's downfall. That's our topic today. On to the point, a very warm welcome. And here are the guests who will answer that question. It's a pleasure to welcome Dan Hamilton. He's a professor for political science at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He's also currently a Robert Bosch-Fellow in Berlin, and he says pandemic, recession, systemic racism, all made worse by President Trump. It is a combustible brew. And it's a pleasure to welcome Matthew Karnitschnig. He is Chief Europe Correspondent for Politico, and his view, the pandemic is Trump's Waterloo. The main question now is not if he will lose, but rather by how much. And we're very glad to have Soraya Sarhaddi Nelson on the program. She is program director at KCRW, a radio station based here in Berlin that partners with American Public Radio. And she says Donald Trump's performance regarding COVID-19 may not matter because recessions lead to re-election losers. So, Matthew, you say Trump is looking at certain defeat, and the situation in your own home state of Arizona would certainly seem to bear you out. It is a Western Sunbelt state, John McCain territory, yet apparently it is now in play, no longer a sure bet for the Republican Party. So what's going on?
Well, I think people are realizing that what Trump has done over the past several months just hasn't worked. It's no longer a theoretical question when the local hospital is running out of intensive care beds, when people you know in your family or in your group of friends has been hit with coronavirus or is dying of it or has died. It's really starting to hit people home, I think, in a way that it hasn't up to now. And you're also seeing, obviously, the economic effects, which are quite dramatic in a place like Arizona, for example, which relies on a lot of tourism from elsewhere in the country. They're really feeling it. And at the beginning, things seemed to be going fairly well. And because they opened up too early on the advice of the president and others, they're now really, really suffering. It's become one of the red zones in the United States, unfortunately.
Soraya, you say it's mainly the economy that counts, but it seems that older voters and some suburban residents in states like Arizona have lost trust in the president because of his lack of leadership during the corona period. Wouldn't losing their support be pretty critical for his election chances?
Well, there's no doubt there's a lot of disappointment there. But where you look at the surveys and you look at the questions, when the question is asked about who can lead Americans out of this this economic crisis that we're in, that's whether it's caused by the pandemic or whatever else, people still have more faith. I mean, the numbers are much closer between Biden and Trump at that point. So there still is. I mean, I think James Carville said it best when he talked about it's the economy, stupid. I think that rule still applies. And if you look at history, if you look at recessions, it's recessions that create losers. Doesn't mean that President Trump won't lose, but I think the recession will be more of a driving factor.
And we will come back to the state of the economy a little bit later, but let me ask Dan about your opening statement. You talked about a combustible brew. Exactly what do you mean by that, and how combustible? Do you see a potential for ongoing social unrest?
Absolutely. It's really not an exaggeration to say it's the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It really is all together crises one after another. You have the pandemic, which is out of control. You have on top of that a century, rare century, one in a century recession, probably depression. You have massive social unrest now going on because of systemic racism. It's, I think, as Matt said, when you see who's being affected, it's disproportionately affecting people of color. And that has exacerbated, plus the recession also affects people of color more. All of this has come together, and all these protests and uprisings one sees, that's not going to go away. And all of the three of those have been made worse by Donald Trump and the types of policies he's pursued. So I really do think all of this will be with us for some time. It's not something where we're going to get over it anytime soon.
We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But before we continue, let us take a look at how the different elements of that combustible brew blend together.
The USA is in its fourth year under Donald Trump. For many Americans, his presidency stands for racism and social injustice, long-standing problems that have intensified during the corona crisis. Millions of Americans have no health insurance, no apartment, and no job. Despite improving slightly, the unemployment rate is still the highest it's been since World War II. The patriotic festivities on the 4th of July can't distract from these issues.
I don't really see much to celebrate in America right now. I'm not seeing what I believe this country stands for these past few years.
The pressure on Donald Trump is increasing. In many polls, he's approximately 10% behind his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden. Many Americans are dissatisfied, angry, or afraid. Only 17% are still proud of their country.
Because there's a lot of people that just vote Democrat, they don't know any better.
I think Trump is a good president, I really do. I mean, he's done a lot more for this country in 90 days than Obama did in 8 years, so.
4 months until the next elections, and the country is more divided than ever before. Is America now paying the price for Trump's presidency?
So as we heard there, both the virus itself and the economic after effects of the lockdown have taken the harshest toll on those who are already vulnerable. Dan mentioned it as well. The death rate for African Americans is almost twice that for white Americans. African Americans have also been among the first to lose their jobs. Soraya, why is that?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what is available to people of color versus and to black communities in particular. I mean, they just don't. It's the haves and the have-nots. And health insurance plays a big role. Also, contributing factors to what makes coronavirus more virulent in some than others. That's something that the scientists have talked about. And also, they're just on a lower. I mean, the socioeconomic reality is that you have richer white people, richer suburban people than you do, blacks, or who still tend to live in inner cities and those places. So there is a definite discrepancy and divide there.
Dan, does that mean, in a way, that this terrible toll we've seen in the U.S. is not really Donald Trump's fault after all?
Well, he didn't cause the pandemic. It started in China and has spread, throughout the world. But you can see many other countries have gotten a hold of it. Many other countries have had wise leadership that has tried to communicate the extent of the challenge that we're facing. And President Trump has done the opposite. He's willfully ignoring it. He has really nothing more to say. He's now implementing rules that will force schools either to open or deport international students, for instance. He's doing everything he can to sort of force the economy to get back on track, even though we're still in the first wave of the pandemic. In Germany, one talks about maybe a second wave coming. Well, we have never reached the end of the first wave in the United States, and it keeps rolling across the country with unbelievable impact. So he didn't cause it, but it's been exacerbated.
So if I understand Dan correctly, Matthew, he would be saying essentially that Trump's lack of leadership or poor crisis management exacerbated structural vulnerabilities. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't think there's any question, and this is why I think it's going to come down to his management of the crisis on election day. The economy, I think, is one aspect of that. But there are counterexamples, and I think this is going to be a big problem for Trump to explain why the richest country in the world has the highest death rate of any country, and ignored a lot of the signs early on, and did not take the steps it could have taken, like many countries in Europe did, but not only. If you look to New Zealand, Australia, and others who took the danger seriously. And he did exactly the opposite, and now he's paying the price for that strategy. And I think people are waking up to it, because you can't ignore the fact that a lot of people are dying, that there are a lot of coffins rolling by, and this is going to be really difficult for him to recover from.
One quick question on that lack of management, a symbolic piece that many people have focused on, Trump not wearing a mask. He's often blamed for setting a bad example by not doing so. But if you look at the culture in your state, for example, Arizona, wouldn't it have been the case that many people there would not have wanted to wear a mask either? That sort of freedom-loving culture that we know from the U.S., doesn't that make it harder to get people to follow the rules no matter who's in the White House?
Absolutely, but that's exactly why leadership is very important at a time like this. And if he had early on suggested to people that they wear a mask and shown his willingness to wear a mask, it would have had a huge impact. And I heard today from a minister here in Germany who said that in managing the crisis here, it was crucial that Angela Merkel early on stopped shaking people's hands and showed that, she was taking these rules seriously. And then you had an acceptance in the population for, these restrictions. And because of kind of the liberty-loving American mentality, it would be more difficult there. There's no doubt. But I think that Trump would have had an easier time in convincing people from Arizona than Barack Obama would have, for example.
But I think that presumes, though, that everyone accepts that this virus is actually a virus and that it's a pandemic and that there's a medical reason to do this. I mean, in the end, the mask has become perhaps the most political symbol at the moment. And wearing it or not wearing it isn't about protecting yourself or protecting others from the virus, but it's about where you stand on the political spectrum.
Exactly. So let's talk about that a minute, because political polarization seems to encompass everything that happens in the United States, and it also encompasses the virus. Views of how dangerous this virus is, to some extent, depend on people's political party affiliation, which seems surprising, I think, to many outside America. What's going on there, and what role do media play in that?
Well, there's no doubt in America that the media play a big role in that. Whether you believe the side that veers toward Trump, that it's the fake media or the left media or whatever that's causing it, or whether you look at the other side, that it's Fox News in particular, that's sort of drawing this debate away from science or from rational sort of approach that you see in other countries, including Germany. So the media is definitely playing a role in that, but it's also the fact that the pandemic, while the numbers are escalating at a very alarming rate, the deaths are high, it's still not enough. I mean, I really do think that the tipping point may come if we, God forbid, have a New York scenario going on in Arizona or in some of these other states that are pivotal to the election this fall. If you start seeing refrigerator trucks taking away coffins or something like that, then maybe people will start to actually wake up and say, well, this isn't a political debate, and this, in fact, is something that we should be paying attention to because the health of everybody in the country is at stake. I just don't see at least, I mean, I'm sitting here in Germany, and again, what I'm reading and what I'm consuming is how I'm coming to this conclusion, but I just don't get the sense that Americans take this all that seriously yet, despite the overwhelming and staggering numbers that we see.
Dan, let me take us back to the question of the political consequences for Donald Trump, also in the context of political polarization in the United States. We are seeing really record high levels of mistrust in political leaders generally and in the other political party. So, in the beginning of the program, we heard a soundbite or two from President Trump's Independence Day speech. He's used that speech and other recent public appearances to really blast the left, blaming them, for example, for the Black Lives Matter protests, saying that they're trying to tear down America's historical culture, and so on. When you look at his election campaign strategy, has he decided to play entirely to his base, and can he win on that basis?
You know, the polarization of which you were just discussing, I think, especially, say, for a German audience, to understand our political parties in the United States really kind of big tents. They don't have the same sort of programmatic platforms that have any meaning for a European context. And within each party, there is a vicious civil war going on. So the polarization is not sort of between right and left, it's actually between lots of different kinds of groups. Within the Democratic Party, right now, particularly given the social unrest, the progressive sort of element of the Democrats are putting huge pressure on Joe Biden to go as far more left than he can. Their candidates didn't win the nomination process, but they are having a big fight.
We're talking about Elizabeth Warren, we're talking about Bernie Sanders.
They're having a big fight right now. And so Biden's being pushed in that direction. He's trying to hold sort of the mainstream. Trump, you're seeing pieces of the Trump coalition, Republican coalition, start to break away. You see a number of governors now who had gone along with opening up things. Governor of Florida, was celebrating back for business, and now they're all shutting down again as this pandemic reaches them and the recession reaches their toll. Evangelicals, which had been really supporting Trump for a lot of different reasons, are starting to break away. So parts of his base now aren't with him. And that'll be really important in a number of these battleground states, which one has to understand in the American system really is very important. You don't win a public opinion race, you have to win 50 different states in those electoral votes. So a state like Arizona or Pennsylvania will be really critical.
Or Wisconsin, where Soraya is from. Matthew, the Trump administration, as we've talked about, has long pushed for quicker reopening of the economy. Now it's pushing hard for quicker reopening of the schools. Does that make sense given current conditions in the U.S.?
Well, there's a lot of debate about that, even in Europe. And as Trump, I think, pointed out yesterday, they're opening schools across Europe, so there's no reason for the U.S. not to do so. I think, this is a question where the scientists have to weigh in and advise the politicians. I don't think it is one of his craziest ideas, to be honest, to suggest that schools reopen. I'm not sure that threatening to pull funding from them if they don't is the wisest course. But coming back to what Dan was saying, it does seem to be a tactic maybe to pull back in some of this Republican coalition that has supported him in the past, in particular the suburban moms who have been crucial for him so far. They were crucial in 2016, sort of semi-wealthy or well-off Republicans living in the suburbs generally supported him in 2016. And if he loses them, especially women who don't like him personally, they don't like a lot of his policies, but they still supported him, he's going to have difficulty if he can't win that group again.
Soraya, you said in your opening statement the economy is the thing that could do him in. But in fact, the job numbers for June didn't look too bad. In fact, Trump called them spectacular news, and he said the economy is, quote unquote, roaring back. You say the economy could bring him down. So, how do you...
But it could also help him win. I mean, because right now there was a bank rate survey, I think it was, not too long ago, that showed 45% of those people surveyed, Americans surveyed, said their finances are the same, which to me was surprising considering what's been going on with the economy. If let's say that trend upward, if the recession doesn't get worse, then I think that's a benefit to him, come the election time. Because in the end,
will it get worse?
I mean, it seems like it can't get better if the situation with coronavirus is going to force more shutdowns, if you end up with more of a crisis than we're seeing now. And right now, everything is exponentially going up in terms of the first wave, which, as Dan mentioned, isn't over yet. I have a hard time seeing it getting better, but I don't understand the stock market these days, frankly. I don't understand how it can, go up and vacillate the way it does in the world, and that seems to be a driver of elections.
I think the difficulty is he only has 3.5 months. And it's very unlikely that things are going to improve markedly over the next 3.5 months. And, certainly if you look at the infection rates, not just, in the Southwest, but across the country, I mean, there's no sign that this is slowing down. Some people say this isn't the first wave, this is a forest fire, and like a forest fire, it's just going to continue to burn. There's not going to be a second fire. You're going to have flare-ups here and there, but that the problem is now so big that there is no hope of bringing it under control in the same way that, say, Germany managed to.
Which, of course, is one reason that besides applauding his own crisis management, the president also has repeatedly tried to point the finger at other countries and at one country in particular for causing the ravages of corona. In his first election campaign rally a few weeks ago, he referred to corona as Kung flu. Here's a reminder of where he puts the blame.
We got hit by the virus that came from China. And we've made a lot of progress. Our strategy is moving along well.
Don't forget, before the China plague came in, and it's a China plague, before that came in, we had the best job numbers we've ever had. We had the best economy we've ever had. We had the best stock market we've ever had. Now we open, we got to get it open because, I said, we got to get it open. People need it. People get sick from the other also. It's not just from the virus. They get sick from all of the other things that happen. You know what I mean?
Soraya, is that blame game going to work in the U.S.?
It seems to be working so far. I mean, it's amazing how much he is able to deflect by doing that. And there's no doubt that Americans do feel, I mean, at least during this administration, I've seen more of a isolationist sort of approach and America first. I mean, that resonates with people. So I think him if he's pointing the finger at China or if he's pointing the finger elsewhere, I think that, again, is something that he benefits from. But in the end, will he succeed? With 3.5 months, as Matt points out. So it's not much time.
Dan, I know you've done a good deal of research on China. Some critics say Trump, if he's succeeded in anything, it's in making China great again. George Packer, a New Yorker writer, recently said that Trump's America is becoming a failed state. What's your impression when you look also at how Europeans see the U.S. today?
Well, it's quite a spectacle, I must say. And I said all of these things, a confluence of crises with a leadership that's absent or has exacerbated them. So it is. On the other hand, it's counterintuitive perhaps to my European colleagues, but if you look at the wave of social unrest in the United States that's going on, the sheer anger at the systemic racism that prevails in our country that really isn't addressed, I take some heart in that. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful civil movement that is really shaking the country. I don't know that that's such a bad thing, frankly. It's time this is waking us up. The pandemic is waking us up to some things, and that's a cathartic time. And I don't know that that's a weakness of the United States. I think you could say it's a strength. How it turns out, I don't know, but I've been heartened by the activism of a lot of people.
Let me come back to our title, which asks if Corona is Trump's downfall. Could we also put it another way, that Corona is perhaps revealing that Trump has become America's downfall?
Well, I'm maybe more optimistic than that question. I think that, if anything, America over the last few hundred years has shown its ability to reinvent itself and to emerge from crises like this. This isn't the first crisis. As John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, said recently, he's pretty optimistic about the country's ability to heal after one Trump term. 2 Trump's terms, he's more skeptical, and I think he's probably right about that.
Soraya, let's say Trump does lose in November. What legacy does he leave to his successor?
Major cleanup time. I mean, I just don't know how any president how Biden is going to be able to sort of undo or unravel everything that's been unraveled, if you will, over the past 4 years. So, I mean, I cannot remember, any time that has ever been as chaotic as these last 4 years. And I think that's the legacy, that he will leave. I mean, just destruction, in his path on every front.
Dan, briefly, if you would, polarization really now in every branch of the government, executive, legislative, and judicial. Can Biden really deal with that in those first 2 crucial years after an election, if he wins?
It's really important in our system to look at the other elections that will happen in November besides the presidential one. If the Democrats also capture a majority in the Senate, plus the House of Representatives, that creates a Democratic majority that maybe things could get done. Barack Obama had that in his first 2 years. He didn't get much done. So it's not a guarantee. But I think Joe Biden will have to say, we're not going back to something. We're going to build something new.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.